Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished entrepreneur from South Africa, but speaking to us today from Amsterdam, Mr. Nic Haralambous. Nic, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Nice to be here.
Thank you. Nic is an entrepreneur, a global keynote speaker, and a best-selling author. He has focused on building and scaling tech-focused businesses, and he's an author of 3 books. So, Nic, my first question to you, tell me about your journey and what motivated you to start your first business when you were only 16?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd say my technology journey started when I was about 11 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Back in 1994 or 95 in South Africa, we were just coming out of apartheid, and the internet was just starting to expand into the world. At the time, South Africa had about 30,000 connected internet devices, and for whatever reason, at the age of 11, my parents decided to get me an internet connected computer.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a 486 or a 586 something back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I taught myself to code at the age of 11, got connected to the internet, built websites, met people online through MIRC chat. And then high school kicked in. And when I was 16, in grade 10, one of our term projects was to start a small business
Mm-hmm.
in the term. And the person who made the most revenue at the end of the term would win this competition. And I slaved away but didn't win. The person that won got their parents to drive them to McDonald's every morning and got the kids McDonald's and sold McDonald's in school. And that was an interesting lesson, and I think the bug bit me there. My family is very entrepreneurial. My great grandfather, grandfather, father are all entrepreneurs, so I think it was in me.
Mm-hmm.
But like most Mediterranean parents, my parents didn't want me to go down the route that they went down, so they sent me to university. I studied journalism, politics, and philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
But the technology bug just bit me, and the entrepreneurial bug never left me. So while at university, I started a band and we recorded an album and we went touring, and I started a social media network, and it just never ended. So at 16, I started and never stopped.
What an amazing journey. Thank you. So, you've spent a lot of time building and scaling tech-focused businesses. My first question for you, Nic, is what are the most common mistakes new tech entrepreneurs make when they start their business?
Yeah, I think the word new there is an interesting one that got me thinking. I'm not so sure that new is actually relevant to mistakes that people make, because I've made repeated mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
New, second, first, third try. So I think that as I'm aging, I'm looking back on my businesses for 20 odd years. And the number one thing that I think that people make the mistake around is choosing the wrong idea.
Mm-hmm.
I think especially when you're younger, it's easy to have this very small frame of reference and a small world view, because you're in high school and then you think, oh, my business idea should cater to high school children. I'm a university student. Oh, my business idea should cater to university students. And you never really get out of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that a lot of entrepreneurs commit to an idea, but they've chosen the wrong idea, and then they're too proud to admit that it was the wrong idea, and they just spend the next decade of their lives building something that was never going to work.
Right.
So I would say that choosing the wrong idea is top of the list. And then two other quick ones is misunderstanding product market fit. I think that people wait for product market fit for too long. If you've got it, you know you've got it. If
Mm-hmm.
it's real, you know it's real. If you have to wonder if it's really product market fit, it probably is. When you find true product market fit, it just explodes, and you know it and you feel it and it's real and you can't stop it. And that kind of ties into the first one of choosing the wrong idea, that if you aren't facing product market fit, then maybe you've got the wrong idea. And then the final one is more of a lagging indicator. There is vanity metrics. I think when you're a first time entrepreneur, I was there. My first real venture backed business, we built to 1 million users, but we had no profit,
Mm-hmm.
and it was an irrelevant fantasy metric to have 1 million users. So I think, yeah, that would be my last one.
Well said. Well said. And what would you say are some of the critical components of a successful tech startup?
Um, I I'm going to be controversial here and say that I don't think the tech even is the relevant thing for most tech
Yeah.
startups. I think early on, people are the only thing that matters.
Mm-hmm.
I think that ideas are aplenty, but execution is the key thing. And if you're working with an average co-founder or you've hired average people, you're going to have an average product and you're going to scale in an average way. So without fail, picking the right partners to work with upfront when you're a founder, and I think partners matter. Building on your own is exceptionally difficult. So I prefer to build with a partner. And then hiring good people as you go. It's very easy to say and it's very common knowledge, but it's very hard to do, is to hire the right people at the right time for your business.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'd say people are probably early on the things that people need to get right.
Mm. And how important is a founder and a co-founder?
Oh man, so important. I'll give you a quick anecdote. My first venture-backed business that we scaled quickly. Within a year and a half, we scaled it to 1 million users. We found a partner that was building a social network in Nigeria off the back of our technology that was also scaling to 1 million users. And we took a turn and we started to lose money. And I took a salary cut for 6 months. We had a business of about 20 employees. I had one co-founder who was 10 years older than me. He was the technology guy. I was the business guy. And he refused to take a salary cut. And after we'd recovered and broken even again, he actually ended up selling the business behind my back to one of our competitors and forced me into an exit. So, how important are co-founders? I would say they matter more than just about anything in the first couple of years of your business.
Mm.
People like to say, don't work with family or don't work with friends or only work with whatever. Just work with whoever you can work with.
Mm.
Work with anybody who you can put up with you and who can build something with you and has the same vision as you, but complements your skills.
Mm. Great response. My next question, Nick, is how important is building a brand for a startup?
I wish that this was a bit more specific of an answer. I think that it's about context. I
Mm-hmm.
think that there are businesses that are brand led because the founders know how to tell a good narrative and are good storytellers and can rally people. But
Mm.
then there are also businesses that are exceptionally tech focused and their CEOs and founders are all tech people who aren't good with telling a story.
Mm.
And their fundamental value is in a good product,
Mm.
not necessarily a good brand that has a good product. I think that good brands work to a level, but if the product beneath the brand isn't sufficient, good enough, doesn't have fit, or it doesn't appeal to supporters, then the brand is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that branding is an absolutely imperative part of getting a good product out into the world.
Mm. Well said. Let's talk of scaling now. I mean, we can move from building to now scaling.
Mm.
How do you approach scaling your businesses? And what are some of the effective strategies that you have followed to scale up?
I approach scaling carefully as I've gotten older. I think the idea of scale is a very westernized, Americanized view of how to
Yeah.
build something, that it must be big, it must scale from day one, or it's not relevant. And I don't buy into that. I think the thing that I'm choosing to do as I'm getting older when I build businesses is define the outcome that I'm looking for.
Mm.
Is this idea a $1 billion idea, or is it a lifestyle business? Or is it going to give me passive income? Is it a temporary business? Is it something I'm building to flip? And then I build accordingly. So scale for me is really about perspective. And if your perspective is this thing needs to be 1 billion users or it's not worth anything,
Mm-hmm.
then that's fine. But I think that we in the world of social media have gotten lost in the idea that everything must scale or it's a failure.
Yeah.
And that's just not true. Like it's the math is so simple that if you are trying to build a sustainable side hustle and you get 1,000 customers paying you $100, you have got a sustainable business. You
Mm.
don't need it to scale beyond that.
Mm.
So I would argue that I'm not answering your question in terms of what most people would expect,
Mm-hmm.
that you scale by having, elastic servers and millions of people and offices. that's all okay if you're building a business that wants $1 billion exit.
Yeah.
But if you're not, then just build it for what you think is capable of building into your life, and that's cool too.
And when you work with your clients to scale a business, what are some of the challenges you have faced?
When we really hit product market fit, the scaling challenges back then, I'm talking about pre-Amazon Web Services now, was managing your service stack, was spinning up servers in the proper time frame, was predicting your scale so that you could scale up and afford to scale up. Nowadays, actually scaling your physical infrastructure is significantly easier. You whip out Amazon Web Services, you add on some servers, and you go. And I think the world is set up for that more now because social media allows your distribution to be so much more dramatic than it used to be. So I would say that the processes and the people allow you to scale effectively. And if you've got, again, it's the same drum that I'm beating, but if you've got average people who aren't preparing, who aren't looking forward, who don't understand your business, then scaling becomes impossible. If you've hired the best possible human beings for the problem you're trying to solve, then scaling isn't actually an issue. And the thing that I learned early on in my career is preparing for scale before you have it is actually somewhat problematic because you're building a business that doesn't exist on a cost base that exists today. So you're scaling from 2 million, 3 million, 4 million users, and you're paying for that preparation, but you're only generating revenue for 10,000. So the plan has to, what's that phrase? The plan, the map is not the terrain. That it's good to have a map, but when you're on the ground, the terrain looks different. So the best thing that I could advise in terms of scaling, and I do this with anybody I work with, is have the resilience and the preparation to be able to pivot, to understand your space well enough that you aren't committed to one plan because that plan might not be working when you start to scale.
Well said. I want to now talk a little bit about fundraising, and that's another area that you do a lot of work in for startups. How do you approach the whole concept of fundraising if a startup entrepreneur comes to you?
Oh man, it has evolved so much over the years.
Yeah.
In my early 20s, when I was just starting out raising my first VC, I thought the venture capital was the be all and end all. But raising, and I've done it. I've raised millions of dollars over a 20-year career. And what I've learned is that raising funding is the start of your pain, not the end of your pain. What a lot of entrepreneurs don't understand is VCs expect 10 times their money within a 5-year scale. That's an average. Obviously, there's differences to that. But if you are raising venture capital today and you can't see your business 10xing their money in 5 years, you've chosen the wrong path of funding. So the way that I look at funding when people come to me and approach me to invest in their businesses, the first thing I do is ask the entrepreneurs what the single most important metric in their business is, and if they're moving it and in which direction. Because most businesses can be nailed down to a single metric, whatever that is for your business, whether it's user growth, revenue growth, new accounts, whatever. And then I ask the entrepreneurs what they'll do with the funding to get to profitability. And I understand that that is not traditional venture capital. That's great, but the world doesn't need more billion-dollar failures. We need more profitable, sustainable businesses creating employment in emerging markets. And I believe that that is the way that we should be looking at investing because billion-dollar failures make a few small groups of people wealthy, and it's the same group of people. But sustainable businesses that are profitable, that can slowly scale and create employment, they affect the country's growth. I mean, in South Africa, something like 80%, maybe it's not that big, 60 to 80% of people are employed by small business. They're not employed by big corporates. And that's the drum that I'm trying to beat when I think about investing and raising funding.
Another very interesting question that has often been asked of me, and I'm going to ask you the same question when it comes to fundraising, is for a startup, how long should an entrepreneur bootstrap versus picking up funds as soon as they're available?
Yeah, I think that this is a very contextual question. So the first question to add to this is what's your risk appetite? So if you are a very risk-averse entrepreneur, then you bootstrap for as long as you can, you test the market, you prove product market fit, you scale, and you slowly grow until you are justifying a fundraise off the back of profitability. If you are a high-risk entrepreneur in your early 20s, like I was, then you go out, you raise money as aggressively as you can, as quickly as you can, so that you can prove the things you need to know. And once you've proven them, then you start going into Series A and Series B and scaling upwards. So it's one depends on who you are and what you're trying to build. And then the second thing is how much of your company you want to own so that you can scale it. And once you go down the venture capital path, you need to get comfortable with the idea that you will lose control of your business over time. The Buck CEO owns like 2 or 3% of his business. Mark Zuckerberg is the outlier that everybody looks to as the shining light, but he is the exception that proves the rule. He managed to keep control while losing equity in fundraising rounds. Most entrepreneurs don't do that. So I'd say that it really comes down to what you want out of that business. And that's why the last question I answered is, well, I scale businesses according to what I need from that business, not just because I need to scale it. And 20 years ago, venture capital was all the rage. Now I would argue that bootstrapping, building in public, and scaling a profitable business, 1-man, 2-man, 3-man companies is the way to go, especially with AI and this distributed workforce that we have around the world.
Well said. Well said. My next question is on culture, Nic. And, one is culture of the organization, the other is the culture of innovation. I'd love to get your perspective on culture for startups and for young entrepreneurs.
Culture, I would argue, comes down to the people you hire. And I've learned over the years that hiring slowly and firing quickly is the way to go. Culture starts at the top and trickles down, but it also trickles up when you start to grow your business. And strong personalities can dominate little pockets of your company without you realizing it and change the fundamental culture inside of it. But ultimately, the founders define culture, and if they don't, the next biggest personality will. So it is up to the founders to own that. But I think that culture is eaten up by incentives. And that sounds like a strange link, but I have noticed in startups I've invested in, companies I've built, and businesses I've worked in, that incentives dictate culture a lot of the time. And that ties in maybe to the conversation you want me to have around innovation shortly. But if you incentivize a group of people to grow top line revenue, then everything in the organization over time shifts towards top line revenue. That is a different company to building for quality. And that's a different company if you're pushing brand as your incentive. So what you incentivize actually permeates through into the company. And I would argue that a lot of founders misunderstand that relationship between incentive and the second and third order effects and what happens in the lower echelons of their business.
Well said. So time for 3 more questions for you. My next question is again something that a lot of startup entrepreneurs keep talking about. How can a young entrepreneur balance short-term goals with long-term vision?
Yeah, this is one that I think you never really get right at a business. It takes a lot of iterative thinking, planning, a lot of reassessment. But I am quite fond of the Rockefeller Foundation or the Rockefeller Habits way of doing it. John D. Rockefeller had this method where he had a 5-year vision and he had his core team look to 5 years and go, this is where we want to get. What are you doing today that helps your week, that helps your month, that helps your year, that helps your quarter, that helps you get to that 5-year vision? And the key thing with that goes all the way back to the start of our conversation is if you've picked the right product and you're building the thing that you think will last for a decade, then you can look forward and go, well, the world was going to be like this in 10 years. To get there, what do we have to do today? And how do we shape the things that we do? So that's an oversimplification of a very financial problem, right? And the financial problem is cash flow. And I mean, in my businesses, we've done everything you can imagine to get cash flow to tide us over to build the long-term vision. And a really good example of this is that same business I raised venture capital for 15 years ago. We built out a platform that allowed you to build your own social network. Anybody could just whip it up and build their own social network. Our biggest client was Guinness, the brand, the beer brand in Nigeria. And Guinness, if you didn't know, is the second biggest country in the world for Guinness is Nigeria. A lot of Guinness is made in Nigeria. And they started scaling, and we were building our platform now for one client. And we did that for short short-term financial gain. In the end, what happened is that company's ad agency cloned our software and didn't renew our license. And we ended up going from millions in revenue to zero in almost a week.
Wow.
And that is short-term revenue gain that sacrificed the long-term platform plan we had. So there is this constant battle between, can we survive to build this long-term future by doing small short-term things? And there is really no clear-cut answer here. It's your best judgment at the time.
Well said. Two more questions. You're a tech entrepreneur. You support a lot of startups. What are your thoughts on the future of Web3 and its potential impact on startups?
Oh, I mean, I think I'll ask a question in response. What would you define as Web3?
I beg your pardon?
I think I'd ask you a question in response. What would you define as Web3?
Web3 is, what I'm talking about is, what's coming in, whether it is metaverse, whether it is the ability to be able to communicate and get feedback from the people you're talking to. And then, of course, the associated new technologies that have all come in, whether it is a ChatGPT or whether it is AR, VR, or anything else that you can think of.
Yeah, I think this next wave of technology is interesting. I mean, I was around when Web 2 was just getting started, Delicious and Dig, and social media wasn't really a thing, and X used to be called Twitter. And we thought then that wave was the wave, and everything else would just pale in comparison, and nothing would be like this again. And I think that we've got echoes of those movements happening now. I am in circles where people are panicked to build things before the opportunity closes. And I mean, I've learned so many times over that the opportunity is pervasive for good ideas and good execution. It doesn't matter when you build the thing. The AI wave isn't ending anytime soon. We're only really at the beginning of this. If you think that you're too late in AI, you are way, way, way too early. Like we've got a decade before this becomes real. If you think that Facebook is 20 years old, it takes decades for these technologies to realize themselves. So I would say that we're nascent, we're early, and there are exciting opportunities for people to build different kinds of businesses. Businesses that don't need 3,000 people, businesses that don't need huge tech stacks. I'm interested in this next wave of Web3, solving real human problems by obscure entrepreneurs in the most crazy random places. I think the era of big tech spaces like Silicon Valley is coming to an end, and I think that localized problems are going to be solved by localized solutions. It might take us 20, 30 years to get there, but I don't think that we can have 2 or 3 people dictate what the world is like anymore, because the world is different.
Well said. And my last question to you, you're an author of 3 books. Tell me about your books.
Yeah, so I actually studied journalism in my youth. So writing has always been kind of part of what I wanted to do. And my first book I wrote called Do, Fail, Learn, Repeat. I wrote as a response to my co-founder selling my business behind my back, and I needed to like offload the story of how I got to where I was and what happened. So that was just a telling of my painful story of being an entrepreneur. And then the bug bit me of writing books, and COVID kicked in, and I started writing a book about how to start a side hustle in COVID. And along with that book, I wrote the book, I published it, it became a bestseller. And off the back of that, I also launched a fund where I gave away, at the time, it was $500 to $1,000 every single day for a year in 2021. And I coached every single person that I gave money to. At the end of it, I ended up funding 235 side hustles. I coached nearly 300 people in a year and gave away, I think it was $200,000 or $300,000 in the space of 18 months. So I've generally tried to write books that are helpful to entrepreneurs, help them understand how to run businesses and be better humans while they run their business. And that was the third book, was the Business Builder Toolkit. It was all of the mental models that I've used over 20 years to help be a sane entrepreneur and build things in a more sane way.
And I'm sure these books will be of tremendous help to entrepreneurs or startups. Thank you, Nic, for speaking to me. I think we covered a lot of ground on startups, for scaling up, on funding, and much more. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.